I wasn't supposed to leave the meeting early. It wasn't the plan. But there was a gap, a perfect window between one session and the next, and I decided to take advantage of it. Julia was attending this corporate mixer downtown, and it had been on my mind for a while. The whole point of me coming to this work event was to surprise her. Things had felt off for the past few months, but I hadn't been able to pinpoint why. Maybe showing up unannounced would fix it, would bridge that growing gap between us. Maybe it was a silly idea, but I had to try. The evening air was crisp, and I could feel the cool breeze brushing past me as I parked. The hotel was upscale, one of those towering buildings that seemed to reach the sky. I caught myself feeling a little out of place as I stood in front of the entrance, adjusting my tie. It was funny how I felt so out of sync, even in the nicest suit I owned. I never seemed to belong in these spaces, no matter how much I tried. I walked through the lobby, weaving between groups of well-dressed professionals. It all felt so sterile, so rehearsed. I could hear the clinking of glasses, the low hum of small talk that filled the air like static. I checked my phone, and there was a message from Julia, just a casual, "Can't wait to see you later." I smiled, even though the words felt strange, like we weren't on the same page anymore. But maybe this would help. It didn't take long to spot her. Julia was standing near the bar laughing, and there he was, this man I didn't recognize, standing way too close, leaning in just a little too much. I felt my stomach knot up, but I tried to shake it off. It's just a work event. Maybe they were just friends, right? But there was something in the way they were talking, something in the way their bodies leaned toward each other. The laughter wasn't the kind you shared with just anyone. It was intimate. It was the kind of laugh you only give to someone you feel comfortable with, someone you've shared more than just a few casual words with. I stood there, frozen for a moment, feeling like an outsider in my own life. I didn't want to make a scene. I didn't know what was happening, and I wasn't ready to confront her about something I wasn't even sure about. So I did what I thought was best. I turned around and left quietly, without making a sound. It wasn't about what I had seen. It was about what I hadn't seen. And that realization, the sharp, bitter realization that something had shifted between us, was enough to make me want to leave. As I stepped out into the cool night air, my heart felt heavy. There was no confrontation, no yelling, just this quiet certainty that something wasn't right, and I didn't know how to fix it anymore. I walked away from the hotel, my head spinning with confusion, my heart heavy with an emotion I couldn't quite place. It wasn't anger, not yet anyway. It was just this unsettling sense that something inside our relationship had shifted, and I hadn't been paying attention. I shoved my hands into my pockets as I crossed the street, the brisk night air biting at my skin. But it did little to clear the fog in my mind. Was I overreacting? Was I just making something out of nothing? Julia and I had been drifting for months, hadn't we? At least, that's how it felt to me. But I couldn't ignore the image of her laughing with him, so freely, so easily. I didn't know that man. I didn't even know if I wanted to. But the way they'd been together, it felt intimate. Too intimate for a work event. Too intimate for my wife and someone I didn't even recognize. I didn't know if I was reading too much into it. My thoughts were running in circles. For months, I'd brushed off the little signs, her late nights at work, her distance when we were home, the small, almost imperceptible shifts in how she interacted with me. I'd told myself it was nothing, that maybe I was overthinking things. But tonight, seeing her like that, something in me cracked wide open, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. I found my car and got in, starting the engine without thinking. I didn't have a destination in mind, not really. I just needed to be away from the hotel, away from the memories of what I'd seen. I needed space to think, but the more the miles passed beneath me, the more the questions swirled. Why had things become like this? Was I not paying attention, or had Julia stopped showing up for me long before tonight? I drove aimlessly, hitting streets I didn't recognize, the city lights flashing past my window like they were part of some dream I wasn't quite awake for. How had we gotten here? Just a few months ago, things had felt fine. I remembered the last vacation we took together, the way we laughed over dinner, how we talked about the future, how we felt like a team. But now it felt like I was looking at our relationship from the outside, like it was some old broken down thing that I'd been holding on to, out of habit. Her texts were less frequent. Her smile was different, distant, like she was somewhere else, somewhere I couldn't reach. I had chalked it up to stress, to work, to the pressures of life. But now, I was wondering if those excuses were just that. Excuses. I glanced at my phone. No new messages from her. Of course not. She hadn't reached out. And why would she? She was fine, right? She was with him, laughing, enjoying herself. The thought stung more than I expected it to. I didn't know how long I'd been driving when I pulled over, but the first light of dawn was beginning to creep across the sky. I hadn't found any answers, but I knew one thing for sure now. I couldn't just ignore this. The pit in my stomach deepened as I realized something. I couldn't ignore what I'd seen, the signs, the distance. It wasn't just a bad night or a misread situation. Something had shifted in our marriage, and I was just now facing it. With a heavy sigh, I turned the car around and headed home, the quiet resolve building in me. Whatever was happening between Julia and me, I knew I couldn't keep pretending it was fine. Things had changed, and I needed to figure out what that meant for us. The time for ignoring it was over. The silence between us was growing too loud to ignore any longer. The night had already dragged on far too long, and I still couldn't make sense of what I'd seen, what I'd felt. I needed someone to talk to, someone who wouldn't judge me or tell me I was overreacting. I grabbed my phone and quickly typed out a message to Will. "Hey man, can we talk? I need to vent. Something happened tonight." I hit send, my fingers trembling slightly, not entirely sure what I expected from him. Will had been through his own share of relationship chaos over the years, so I figured he'd know what I was going through. He didn't judge when I told him about my struggles, and more importantly, he didn't rush to conclusions. A few minutes later, the phone buzzed with a reply. "Of course, I'm here. What's going on?" I took a deep breath, not really sure where to begin. I started typing, telling Will about the mixer, the shock of seeing Julia with that man, how everything felt so out of place. I didn't hold back. I told him how her laughter with him had seemed so intimate, how I hadn't known if I was seeing something I wasn't meant to, or if I was reading too much into it. I finished by telling him that I'd left without saying a word, no confrontation. I just walked away. Will didn't immediately respond, which gave me the space to sit with my emotions. But then his reply came, "You did the right thing, Noah. You don't know what you saw, and it's better to process it before jumping to conclusions. But I get why it shook you. That's a lot to handle." It was exactly what I needed to hear. I had been doubting myself, questioning my reaction, wondering if I was just imagining things. But Will's message gave me a little reassurance. I wasn't crazy for feeling unsettled. "I just don't know what to think anymore," I typed back. "I've been trying to put the pieces together for months, but it's like there's always something off, and I'm just now realizing it. I don't even know if I can trust what I saw." Will replied almost immediately this time. "It's hard, man. It's easy to go down the rabbit hole, but don't rush into anything. You need hard evidence, something concrete, before you confront her. Take a step back. Let things settle. Then figure out what you want to do next. I'm here if you need me, okay?" I let his words sink in. It made sense. I couldn't just react on impulse. I needed more than a gut feeling. I needed something solid before I could move forward. "Thanks, Will. I'm not ready to confront her yet. I just need to breathe and figure this out. I'll keep you posted." I sat there in the quiet of my apartment, staring at the phone, trying to convince myself that taking a step back was the right thing. But in my heart, I knew something had shifted. And now I had to find the truth. I wasn't going to rush, but I wasn't going to let it go, either. The next morning, my phone buzzed just after I'd had my first cup of coffee. It was a message from Will. I was already bracing myself for a follow-up about our conversation the night before. I tapped my phone and opened the message, not sure what I was expecting. "Got something for you. Video from the event. You need to see this." A video? My heart started to race. It had barely been 12 hours since I walked away from the hotel, and now Will had something new for me, something concrete, something I hadn't asked for, but knew would change everything. I felt a pit form in my stomach, but curiosity won over. I clicked the link. The video opened with shaky footage, zooming in on a crowd at the corporate mixer. I could see Julia and the man from last night, the one I hadn't recognized, laughing together in the corner of the frame. The camera zoomed in on them, and I felt a jolt run through me. It wasn't the same casual laugh I had witnessed in person. It was deeper, more intimate. Julia's body was angled toward him, her hand resting on his arm. My breath hitched as I watched them lean in closer, the distance between them shrinking even further. The way she looked at him, the way her eyes softened as they spoke, it was unmistakable. I watched it again, my eyes glued to the screen. She wasn't just laughing, she was connecting. She was comfortable. This was more than casual. I replayed the footage, my fingers trembling as I hit rewind and then play again. The truth hit me hard this time. What I had seen the night before wasn't a fluke. It wasn't some harmless moment between coworkers. It was something far worse. Julia was emotionally and physically involved with this man. A nauseating wave of realization washed over me, and I felt sick to my stomach. My first instinct was to call her, confront her, demand answers. But I stopped myself. I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. The weight of the truth sat heavy on my chest, a mix of disbelief and betrayal. I sat back in my chair, my mind racing. How had I missed this? How had I been so blind to the cracks in our marriage? The signs had been there, small things I had brushed off. But this was undeniable. Julia wasn't just pulling away from me. She had already moved on. I watched the video once more, feeling like I was losing my grip on everything I thought I knew. The footage was clear, and there was no mistaking what was happening. Julia had made her choice, and it wasn't me. I looked down at my phone again, at Will's message still open on the screen. It was so simple, just the video and a few words. Had to send this. You need to see the truth. I'm here if you want to talk. I didn't know what to say, what to feel. It was like everything had come crashing down in an instant. I had always thought that, no matter what, we would be able to work things out. But now, I had the evidence, the truth, and I knew there was no going back. The man in the video wasn't just some stranger. He was a part of something bigger, something I hadn't been able to see until now. It wasn't just an isolated incident. Julia had been lying to me for months, and I had been too blind to notice. I couldn't unsee it. I couldn't pretend everything was fine anymore. What had started as a subtle distance between us had now turned into a complete fracture, and no amount of time or words would fix this. As I sat there, staring at the screen, the realization settled in. My marriage was over. What I had thought we were building, what I had believed we were working toward, was nothing more than a facade. And the truth, as painful as it was, had finally come to light. I had no idea what the next step would be, but I knew I couldn't keep pretending. The betrayal was out in the open now, and there was no turning back. The next day felt like a blur. I couldn't shake the images from the video. Julia laughing so intimately with that man. I had to keep reminding myself that it wasn't just a one-off, some innocent interaction. It was more, something deeper, and now I had the truth. I had seen it with my own eyes, but the weight of it didn't settle into my chest until I woke up this morning and realized what it meant. I hadn't spoken to Julia since the night of the mixer. I didn't even want to think about how I was going to approach her, or if I even should. I spent the entire day avoiding her, slipping into this numb space where the world felt quieter, like I could breathe for the first time since the night I walked out of that hotel. I didn't answer her texts. They came in waves, texts full of concern, full of questions, but none of them acknowledged the real issue at hand. None of them asked, "What did you see?" or "What's really going on with us?" It was just more of the same. How had I missed it all? All those little moments I'd brushed off, told myself I was being paranoid. Julia had been pulling away for months. I'd noticed the change, but I kept hoping it was just work stress or life getting in the way. Her odd behavior, the way she spent more nights out late with her friends than with me, the way she started to leave her phone screen down whenever she put it down, the missed moments, the dinners where we ate in silence, the times I reached out and she seemed distracted, the promises she made that always seemed to get lost. I had been so blinded by the hope that things would get better that I convinced myself it was just a rough patch. But now, sitting in my apartment with the phone buzzing beside me, I couldn't lie to myself anymore. This wasn't a rough patch. This wasn't a mistake. Julia had been emotionally and physically involved with someone else. I didn't know how long it had been happening, but I knew it had been going on for far too long. I walked to the window and stared out at the city. The sun was starting to set, casting a soft golden hue over the skyline. Everything outside seemed so normal, so peaceful, and yet, inside, my world was falling apart. The truth was heavy, and yet, strangely liberating. I didn't have to pretend anymore. I didn't have to keep clinging to something that was already broken. I had spent so much time trying to make sense of things, trying to figure out where I went wrong, but now it was clear. Julia hadn't just stopped loving me. She had already chosen someone else, and that hurt. More than anything, it hurt to realize that I had been so far removed from what was really happening. She had built a separate life, one where I wasn't needed, where I wasn't wanted, I picked up my phone and scrolled through the list of texts she'd sent me, the ones I had ignored. Hey, where are you? Are you coming home tonight? Please talk to me. They seem so hollow now, so meaningless. What could I say? What was there to say? The truth was out there. It had been out there for months, maybe longer, and I was just the last one to see it. I sat back down on the couch, my hands shaking as I finally allowed myself to feel everything. The betrayal, the sadness, the emptiness. But underneath it all, there was something else, something I hadn't expected to feel. Relief. It was over. And somehow, I felt a weight lift off me. I was free of the lies, free of the facade we had built. The truth had come crashing down, and while it hurt more than anything I had ever felt, it was also the most real thing I had experienced in a long time. I didn't know what to do next. I didn't know if I should confront her or just walk away and never look back. But I knew this. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine, and I couldn't keep waiting for someone who wasn't coming back to me. I needed to move forward, even though the path ahead was unclear. But right now, the truth was enough. The lies and the secrets were no longer in my way. For the first time in months, I felt like I could finally breathe again. I stayed at Will's place that night. I needed to escape the empty apartment, the silence that seemed to stretch endlessly between Julia and me. Every corner of our home felt too heavy, too familiar, like a weight I couldn't shake off. Will didn't ask me any questions when I showed up at his door. He didn't need to. I had barely spoken when I entered his apartment, just handed him my phone, the video still playing in the background. He knew, just by looking at me, that I wasn't ready for a confrontation. He didn't push, didn't demand answers. He simply offered the space I needed to breathe. The messages from Julia kept coming through, one after the other. Are you okay? Why won't you answer me? We need to talk. I'm worried. But the problem was, she never once acknowledged what I had seen. She didn't ask how I was feeling, or if something had happened. She just assumed that whatever it was, whatever I had seen or felt, could be brushed away with a few concerned texts. But I couldn't ignore the fact that this wasn't just a bad night. It was a sign of everything we had been avoiding for months. Julia had built a separate life, and I was just now beginning to realize how much I had been left out of it. I stayed up late, replaying the past few months in my head, trying to make sense of it all. The missed connections, the lies, the empty promises. I thought about how she had shifted from someone who used to be so open, so present, to someone who seemed like a stranger living in the same house. How many times had I told myself I was overreacting? How many times had I chalked up her behavior to stress or work, convinced that things would get better? I had ignored the small signs, the subtle moments when it felt like she was slipping away. But it wasn't just small moments. It was the accumulation of months, of me giving more than I received, of trying to keep things together while she moved further and further away. And now, as I sat on the couch in Will's apartment, I knew that confronting her, demanding answers, wouldn't change anything. I could see the truth in my mind, clearer than I ever had before. She wasn't the woman I thought she was anymore. She had already moved on. I couldn't help but feel this overwhelming sense of powerlessness. I had been so caught up in trying to save something that had already slipped through my fingers. The worst part was that I hadn't seen it coming. I didn't know how long this had been going on, but I realized now that I wasn't just blindsided by her infidelity. I had been blind to everything else. The emotional erosion of our marriage that had been happening for far longer than I had wanted to admit. Will, sitting across from me, said nothing. He didn't need to. I was processing everything, slowly, in the quiet. There was no rush to fix anything. There was only the weight of the truth, settling in deeper as each minute passed. When my phone buzzed again, I glanced at the screen. It was another text from Julia. This time, it was a voice message. Noah, please, can we just talk? I don't know what's going on with you, but I can't do this anymore. I'm really scared. Please come home. I didn't reply. I couldn't. The words felt empty, even though I knew she was genuinely concerned. But her concern didn't match the depth of what I had seen. Her concern didn't match the truth that had been laid bare. I placed my phone face down on the table. I couldn't face her right now. I didn't know what I would say. I didn't know how I would make her understand that it wasn't just the affair. It was everything. It was the way we had both let things slip, her into the arms of another man, me into the role of the man who never questioned, never pushed. I felt drained, like every ounce of energy had been sucked out of me. Will's quiet presence was the only thing holding me together in that moment. It wasn't a fix. It wasn't a solution, but it was enough to get me through the night. The next morning, I woke up to another text from Julia. This time, it wasn't a question. It was a plea. "Noah, I'm sorry. I don't know what happened. Can we talk? I need to fix this." I didn't reply. I couldn't. And I knew, deep down, that I wouldn't be able to talk to her until I had something concrete, something that could finally make this real for both of us. I didn't know when that moment would come, but for now, I needed space. I needed time to figure out what came next. A few days had passed since I'd last seen Julia, and every moment felt like it had been stretched thin. A never-ending ache I couldn't quite shake. I hadn't answered any of her calls or texts. Every message had been the same: concern, worry, confusion. But none of it addressed what really mattered. None of it acknowledged the truth that had been staring me in the face. Today, though, I knew I couldn't keep avoiding it. I couldn't keep living in limbo, pretending that things would just magically work themselves out. Julia's absence from my life had settled into the empty spaces in my apartment, but I knew it wasn't her absence that was suffocating me. It was the silence, the unspoken truth between us. I stood in the doorway of our apartment, my hands tucked into the pockets of my jacket, staring at the life we had built together. It wasn't home anymore. The place felt hollow, like a museum of our past, a place where the memories no longer carried the same weight. It had been a long time since I had felt truly at home here. I walked into the living room, my footsteps echoing in the quiet space. I went to the closet and grabbed a duffel bag, throwing in a few things, clothes I would need, a few personal items that still meant something to me. But I didn't touch the rest. I didn't need anything else. The pictures on the walls, the trinkets we'd collected together, the things that had once symbolized us as a couple, they didn't matter anymore. They were just reminders of a time that was now over. As I packed, I thought about Julia's last message to me, the one I hadn't read aloud to myself until now. "Please, Noah, we need to talk." It had sat on my phone unanswered, but now, reading the words, I felt a strange sense of indifference. The message wasn't asking for an apology or understanding. It wasn't an acknowledgement of what had happened. It was simply another plea, another attempt to get me to fix what had been broken long before I realized it. I walked past the kitchen and caught sight of the note she had left on the counter when I first left. She hadn't even bothered to call me when she left it there, just a scribbled "Can we talk?" with a heart drawn at the bottom. It felt meaningless now, like everything else. I shook my head and grabbed the note, crumpling it in my hand before tossing it into the trash. It was time to move on. As I finished packing my bag, I saw something else, the stack of unopened bills on the table. For a moment, I considered staying to take care of them, to handle the responsibilities she'd left behind, but something inside me snapped. Why should I? Why should I continue to take care of things that didn't belong to me anymore? I took one last look around, feeling the weight of everything that had led me to this moment. And then, with the bag slung over my shoulder, I walked out of the apartment, closing the door behind me one final time. There was nothing left for me here, not anymore. The drive to the short-term rental wasn't far. It was a small, quiet place, just a room with a bed and a bathroom. The place was nothing fancy, but it felt like a fresh start, a space where I could be alone, where I could process everything without the constant reminder of a broken marriage. I knew I couldn't stay there forever, but for now, it was exactly what I needed. I set my bag down on the bed and stood by the window, staring out at the unfamiliar street below. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of clarity. It was over. Julia was gone. And now, it was time for me to rebuild, to start fresh. I was uncertain, sure, but I had a quiet resolve within me that hadn't been there before. I wasn't going back. I wasn't going to beg for answers that would never come. The silence, the betrayal, the years of emotional distance, they had all led me here, to this moment of painful yet undeniable freedom. I wasn't just leaving the apartment behind. I was leaving everything that had broken me, and I was ready to move on. Days passed since I left the apartment, and I found myself settling into a routine I hadn't expected to embrace so quickly. My new apartment was small, nothing like the home I'd shared with Julia. It was temporary, but it felt like my own space, a space where I didn't have to worry about seeing her face, hearing her voice, or pretending that everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. It was strange at first, adjusting to the silence. The loudest thing in the room now was my own thoughts. At night, I would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to quiet the constant hum of what-ifs, doubts, and regrets. But as the days stretched into a week, the weight of it all started to feel normal. I went through the motions of life, working, eating, sleeping, occasionally meeting with a friend, keeping myself busy enough to avoid thinking too much. I thought about the past, about how everything had changed so subtly over time, until I woke up one day and realized it was all gone. The connection I thought we had, the trust I thought we shared, it wasn't real anymore. And then there were the texts. Julia's text had started again, after a few days of silence, full of concern, apologies, and vague pleas for us to talk. "Noah, please, I don't understand what's happening. Can we just talk? I'm sorry for everything. I miss you. Please come home." But not once did she acknowledge what I'd seen, what I knew, what had broken us apart. Her words felt like hollow echoes now. They didn't hurt anymore, at least not in the way they once did. The anger I might have felt earlier was gone, replaced by something else, something more final, more resigned. I had come to realize that the person I had been holding on to, the person I thought was my wife, wasn't really there anymore. She had become a stranger to me. I could feel the weight of the lies and the distance between us, and it wasn't anger that consumed me anymore. It was just clarity. I understood now that everything I had been holding on to, hoping for a resolution, hoping for an explanation, hoping to fix what was broken, wasn't going to change anything. I didn't respond to her texts. I didn't have the strength to play the game anymore. The phone buzzed again one night, but this time, I didn't even look at it. I had already made my decision. I no longer had anything to say. Time passed, and I began to settle into a strange sense of peace. It wasn't the kind of peace you get after everything is fixed, or after you find closure. It was quieter than that. It was the peace of accepting what is, what was, and what could never be again. There were days when I still felt the emptiness, the residue of what we'd had, but those days were fewer now. The void that Julia left behind didn't feel like it would swallow me anymore. I didn't miss the constant tension between us. I didn't miss the lies. I missed what we had been, what I thought we were, but I had let go. I was starting to rebuild, piece by piece, though the process was slow. I had no idea where it would take me, but I knew I couldn't keep looking back. I had to move forward. The phone buzzed again that morning, more messages from Julia. But I just stared at the screen for a few moments, my thumb hovering over the notification, before I shut it down and pushed it aside. I didn't need to know what she had to say anymore. The truth had already settled inside me, and there was nothing more to discuss. I wasn't angry, I wasn't devastated, I was simply done. The quiet moments of my new life started to feel like the beginning of something I hadn't been able to see before. Maybe this was what freedom felt like. Maybe this was what moving on felt like. For once, I wasn't tied to the weight of unanswered questions or the burden of trying to fix something that had already broken. I had finally let go, and though I didn't know what the future held, I felt lighter, more open. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally living for myself. A few weeks had passed since I left Julia behind. Since the moment I walked away from the apartment, everything felt different. The emptiness was still there, but it wasn't the same kind of suffocating silence. It was a new kind of stillness, a quiet that came with acceptance. I wasn't fighting anymore. I wasn't trying to make sense of things that didn't make sense. I had settled into my new place, adjusting to a life that was now my own. The phone calls from Julia had stopped. The texts had slowed to a trickle, filled with pleading questions that I couldn't answer. Part of me had wanted to respond. Part of me wanted to explain, to offer her the closure she had asked for. But the truth was, I didn't owe her anything. I had already given everything, and now all I had left was myself. That afternoon, I found myself at another work event. I hadn't planned on attending, but I didn't want to sit alone in my apartment anymore. I needed to get out, to remind myself that the world was still moving, that I was still moving. I walked into the room, the buzz of conversation filling the space, the clinking of glasses, the laughter. It felt like an entirely different world, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel out of place. I wasn't looking for Julia. I wasn't even thinking about her. But as I made my way through the crowd, I saw her. She was standing by the bar, talking to a group of people. She looked different. Not the same woman I had once loved. There was something distant in her smile, a detachment in the way she interacted with those around her. She glanced up and saw me. For a moment, I saw the flicker of recognition in her eyes, the briefest flash of something resembling guilt. But that was all. There was no apology, no words, just that brief, uncomfortable pause before she looked away, continuing her conversation with the people around her. I wasn't surprised. The Julia I had known, the one who would have come over to apologize, to talk things through, was gone. This woman wasn't her anymore, and in that moment, I realized something. I didn't feel anything toward her. Not anger, not sadness, not even regret. It was like I was seeing her for the first time in months, and I no longer cared. I walked past her, offering nothing more than a glance, and I didn't look back. Later, in the quiet of my apartment, I finally did something I had been thinking about for days. I grabbed the USB drive, the one that held the video of Julia and the man from the event, the proof of the betrayal I'd already known but had never confronted her about. I plugged it into my computer, checking the file one last time. It was as raw as I had remembered, the laughter, the closeness, the undeniable truth that Julia had been lying to me for so long. I watched it once more, not with anger or sorrow, but with a strange sense of finality. And then, without a second thought, I copied the video onto the USB, packed it up, and addressed it to her. No note, no explanation. Just the video, just the truth. I placed it in the envelope, sealed it, and wrote her name on the front. I didn't need to confront her. I didn't need to say anything. She knew, I knew. And now the truth was out there, plain and undeniable. I dropped the envelope in the mail, and that was it. It was over. As I walked away from the mailbox, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't realized I needed. The truth was no longer something I carried alone. It was out in the open, and it was time for me to move on. The weight that had been pulling me down for so long had finally lifted, and I was free. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. I was no longer tied to the past, no longer held captive by what could have been. I was moving forward, and that was all that mattered. The past was behind me, and the future, uncertain as it was mine to shape.